Ann Schlemmer, CEO of Percona, welcome to the Insight Jam.
Thanks for having me, Doug. I'm glad to be here.
Well, what is the state of the union these days for open source databases?
It is an exciting time in databases, an exciting time in open source. Databases and all things data are front and center as they have been for a while. But I know near and dear to your heart is AI, and that takes a lot of data. So continue to have that spotlight of making sure that things are secure, performant, accessible to uptime and all of that. And then overall in open source, we're in a really interesting inflection of just how things have been evolving over the past 5 years or so, and watching people make license changes and various things like that. So there's lots going on, lots of things to consider.
Well, we will get into the AI stuff, as I like to refer to it in my technical terminology later. But tell me a little bit more about why folks go to open source. What do you think are the drivers that get folks into open source databases to begin with, and then, what has been the evolution of Percona as you've been around now for it's what, over 15 years, almost 20 maybe?
18. I mean, we
18?
just hit 18. We're legal now. So here,
almost out of teenagehood.
that's right. Almost getting kicked out of the house. So
Pretty soon, you'll be up to no good.
Continued no good. So why people get into open source to begin with is the idea of collaboration and openness, just as even hobbyists of people who like to develop, finding interesting things and doing that with a community that you can create right away. Why enterprises continue to adopt and move towards open source is similarly for that sense of community that you can innovate more quickly. So you're not just reliant on your own team. You have literally a world of developers that you can be working with. Total cost of ownership has to be looked at. A lot of people look at that. So in terms of whether it's the licensing cost or the licensing or just, like I said, their own staff, like, do they need to staff out as much if you are contributing or part of a robust project as well. So that's why I'll keep using that word community, right? Community and collaboration is really key as to why people come into the open source space and where they stay.
And then where do folks find you? So where does Percona begin to kind of make sense in that open source data journey?
Sure. So our founder story with Peter Zaitsev and Vadim Tchenko way back in 2006, they had been part of the MySQL AB team, and they weren't happy with maybe on that commercial pressure of looking at what becomes open core, what goes behind the paywall. Didn't feel that was fair to customers. And so what we have done is we've built out an organization that is backed by world experts, but when it comes to the software, we've built upon the upstream releases of MySQL, Mongo, Postgres, and we've added enterprise features that are still available as open source. So on top of that, as we continue to evolve, we have those distributions, and then we also have tooling around that as well that's been put out in the open source space to help people be successful in that really critical area of databases.
So it's I go back a ways to selling e-marketing services prior to Solutions Review. And it was always my what I heard inside organizations while we were talking about, how we take all their data and turn it into all these great marketing programs. There's kind of it was almost like a guilt or a shame around their state of data. That we might not be able to extract that much value, or they were kind of talking around the idea that maybe the data wasn't as great as everyone would have liked. What is the best practice these days for folks to kind of make sure that their data is in game shape as we're in this moment of really requiring the best, cleanest, freshest data for taking advantage of artificial intelligence and generative AI.
So I think with everything, it takes intent and some discipline to make sure that if you're starting out, what we see with some of our customers, that selecting a database on new projects and new offerings gives you that, maybe that do-over. You get that mulligan and say, oh, okay, so we're going to be really intentional as to what database do we want to use, because here's our intended purpose. How do we architect that? And how do we make sure, again, talking to experts, what is that best practice on what is the potential that you're using this data for, being really clear on that. As we continue to evolve, right, the databases that we're in, we have SQL, NoSQL, relational, operational, if you want to say, and then there's a whole other realm of analytical. Well, it's getting a bit of a blurry line that what you're using with your data, how your data can support you. So you might have originally said, oh, we need it for our operations, and now, whoa, this is a treasure trove that we could be using models and learning from, and how do we then extract value that way? So it's really trying to, as best you can, forecast and assume what might this data be used for that you maybe didn't intend upon. So that kind of starts at the beginning with the architecture and having that, again, that discipline and understanding that reality is reality. We grow, we evolve, new technologies come along, there's turnover of staff. You maybe not have been so disciplined in how you named things and whatnot. So it's an ongoing, battle seems a little bit harsh, but it's just an ongoing struggle to make sure that you're taking that time to be disciplined and intentional with what you're doing.
And do you see companies literally kind of taking a complete step back and saying, you know what, we need to begin effectively again by implementing something new and maybe more universal and consistent, and just kind of then transforming their legacy databases into something that is a little more integrated?
It's a big undertaking, particularly depending on the size of the organization to do something like that. If someone's going to make that on the legacy system, what we have seen is that could be, again, looking at the cost and or the lock-in from proprietary databases and moving to open source. So if that's usually, again, depending on the size of the company, that could be a multi-year project of doing that migration off. And if they've made that decision, then there's that opportunity to really, as you just said, think about how do we redo this, but also understanding the criticality of those systems. That's a very thoughtful, long process. That's why typically what we see is as new departments are coming online or new products that they're doing, they'll start with that newer technology or that database that they're thinking about doing so that they get accustomed to it, start building out some of their own best practices there, and then systematically move over that legacy, legacy databases. So continually to evolve, but also understanding that databases are so fundamental and foundational within that whole infrastructure that there is definitely a level of conservatism that takes place.
And I can totally understand why, but it also feels to me like, just like almost every technology, you start with, what's available and
Sure.
you move into it. But now we've been networked for 30 years and organizations have evolved. Generations of decision makers have cycled out, and you're left with this, it is kind of almost like a hodgepodge oftentimes of, connectors and databases and legacy and systems. And we hear all the solution providers bringing all these, we have connectors to everything. All the data integration folks have connectors, all connector based, and don't worry about it. But it seems like if we are headed where I think we're headed, it isn't, you can't remain competitive if you don't have almost a full blown renovation of
Yep,
your data stack.
for sure. Well, and like I said, it's thinking about then how do you architect? Even internally for us, so we look at one of our tools and we think about, is it when we started it, we were really thinking about extensions and plugins, right? Which is a huge thing. Like, oh, that's the way of the world, and APIs, and how do you manage it that way? And oh, right. What's I'm sure others on your call on your shows talk about that technical debt. Oh darn, we have a lot of technical debt, and to get out of that debt, it's not as easy as just a fresh start. How do you do it? But you have to do that in order to get the outcomes that you're looking for. And I think about as well. So, MySQL is what the company started with. We're still there. Well, we're watching customers push the limits on what MySQL was intended to do. You're seeing spin-offs like with Vitess and how do you manage more? Now in the database space, you hear all about vectors and who's going to have vector search. And again, in that evolution, but was that the original intent? Is that underlying architecture set up to do that? In some cases, it's no. So how do we take the modern stack, those plugins and extensions, everything integrates together, and really think about that. And so it's not an easy proposition at all.
Yeah, no,
And
it
yeah,
never is.
no,
It never
no,
is. But
yeah,
it is one of those, I think moments in time for certain organizations where there almost is going to be no choice. And I'm curious how you would help them kind of puzzle through that. What do you guys bring to the table to help them think that through and potentially re-architect their existing data systems?
Well, and you will start at a top level conversation. Say, what are their business priorities, and what are those various critical systems that they have and those production databases, and really understand. We want to be partnering because we don't expect everybody to be database experts, nor should they be. That's what their business is. So it's really starting with, okay, what's your goals? What's your roadmap? And trying to understand how data intensive they are and where things may go. And then really saying, okay, let's look at what are the best databases to support you in that journey. And then starting that path and doing a whole architecture and design and working through those conversations. And always going back to what are their goals? What's their uptime requirement? How much data is coming through? What are the requirements from all the different directions? And then really trying to understand, like I said, large enterprises, they see it as a multi-year project, which is kind of bananas to think about in our world of quarterly earnings and everything right now, and the speed of innovation we've been seeing over the past couple of years. To think about that, I mean, at times, maybe it's because of my role, I get impatient. Like, what do you mean it's 3 year? What do you mean it's 3 years? But the reality is, to do things right, you have to be able to have a blend of that long-term and some flexibility along the way, so that there's a sense of urgency while also being really thoughtful and mindful to make sure you're not messing up the overall business.
Let's talk a little bit about the future of databases. So we've gone through a couple of cycles of evolution, most recently with the cloud. And that is now, I think, after some very strong early resistance, is now being embraced. I know we're moving our offices to a new office park. And as I was walking through it the other day, I realized how many massive empty data centers that aren't all that massive anymore. These feel massive to me because they're empty.
Sure.
but they're really not very big. And I think that's why they're empty. It
Yeah.
used to be you just put everything in a local data center, but now all that's gone, and it is moved to the cloud. Where are we headed? I mean, I know there's talk of data centers being so powerful, and yet technology is changing so much that data will not be processed in the same data center twice. I think I heard this phrase,
Yeah.
that by the time you're ready to replace all the GPUs in a data center or whatever's in there, the literal physical cooling systems and everything will be out of date, and you'll need to rebuild the entire data center again. I mean,
Yeah.
where do you see us headed? I mean, you've seen this evolution firsthand
Right.
for the entire run.
Well, it's interesting. You've got the technology advances that are happening and everything around storage, but then also hearing about, okay, how much energy is all of this taking? Is this the right answer on doing it? We're also seeing with customers that some are still on their cloud journey for sure, but others were like, oh, we went all in on the cloud. And then now there's like, ooh, did we just go a little too far? And thinking about business continuity and risk and how much dependency, right? So again, I'm in open source, so we talk about vendor lock-in, but then you think about, the analogy we've heard that the cloud is now a utility. It's like electricity. Everybody relies on it. And when you have an outage, it's painful. So how do you mitigate that risk? So we're definitely seeing that folks are having multi-cloud policies, if you will. How do you do a blend of hybrid versus the on-prem versus cloud? One of our offerings that we have out in our operators, like working on Kubernetes, we have customers that they are doing a private cloud. So they build out their own private cloud. That's giving them the security that they feel because of their data, and that they have more control over it and can manage all those various risks and their destiny better. So is there going to be just one thing? I think that it's this balance. And there's these outside factors that I'm still not clear on how much of the energy and the climate impact and the voices there. I wouldn't say it's going to slow down technology and innovation, because I don't see that happening, but I think we don't know what that final picture looks like yet.
Yeah, no, I was saying to somebody the other day, I think the energy challenge that these data centers and will require is a good national challenge for the country to kind of face as a nation state. If AI is going to have the impact that I think it's going to have,
right?
It's a kind of a have to have for the country to have an
For sure.
energy policy that can meet the moment. And I'm not sure we have that yet, but I think that's something that should be developed at a national level in maybe a public-private collaboration. But I think that's something we need to get our hands on, because I don't think the energy requirement can be ignored.
It can't be. And then also the fact that current administration has said, we want to lead in AI, right? Which I think that can be nonpartisan, like go all the way across, right?
I completely agree with that. I think that is
right.
nonpartisan, and it
Right.
should be. I mean, I
Right.
think this is part of the competitive nature of nation states, that leading in AI is going to be important.
Right. So then the energy that powers that, and the talent pool that powers that, in all of those, in the various industries and infrastructure that power that, is a conversation that has to be had. That I think that sometimes there is maybe that's someone else's problem, or that'll happen, versus really, like you mentioned, bringing a public and private approach to it and giving it continued attention. So it seems like sometimes we've seen within tech, and there's been some vulnerability or some outage, and then all of a sudden the government's coming in and saying, okay, this is top of mind, we want to make sure we're doing this, and then all of a sudden it falls off the front page. So maybe there's still some work going on, but we need that sustained intention of working together, particularly in this area, because it's vital. And there's lots of gains that can be had, but there's also caution to be mindful of, because history shows time and time again unintended consequences of some, right? I mean, I live in the Pacific Northwest. How many dams are on rivers because that was great to harness the power, and then, oh wait, the unintended consequence of what happened to the fish.
And these things oftentimes are subtle impacts that you don't realize at the moment, as you alluded to, but then need to be dealt with, and then innovation emerges, and salmon ladders or whatever it is that happens along the way are invested against in an effort to make it all right. I'm curious though, with you mentioned earlier about outages and consequences. What did you make? What is the lesson learned from the CrowdStrike event?
Really selfishly, I was really grateful that our company and we weren't impacted by it. Like I wasn't awoken in the middle of the night, so I have empathy for all leaders that were. What the lessons learned? I mean, I really was reflecting on that and thinking about, whoa, how do you rise to an occasion like that when there's such I'll use the word intentionally, that vulnerability that we have just even on technology, and not kicking the can. If the reports are to be believed on maybe like what happened with a certain airline, that their systems weren't up to date and they hadn't been up to date.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. That, I mean, everybody's pointing fingers in every direction around that.
For sure.
I was shocked at the level at which CrowdStrike was within the systems.
Yeah, agreed.
I think everybody was a little shocked at that, almost to the point of uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, I would to think that I mean, just oversimplifying, but a simple upgrade, right, on a piece of software had global immediate impact is stunning.
Down
Quite
to the
frankly,
kernel. I mean, it was like, I mean, how did we allow systems to be that deep into, like, how do we allow that? I'm not making these decisions, but I mean, you've been in big decisions in the past. I mean, how the end user license agreement, I mean, how did it get to the point where it would be able to have such a fundamental impact on a BIOS? I think it wasn't even the operating system.
I suspect people didn't realize, right? Like, obviously didn't realize how critical, like how integral it was in the system. And maybe CrowdStrike didn't realize the extent, right? Potentially, right? Like they found out. We all found out, right?
Yeah, that's not good either.
No, but I mean, think about that too. So in the database space, like how many times have we heard someone dropped a table and then, right? And trying to find that. So we understand that vulnerability, but to have an upgrade that had a bug in it that just went bam, just, I don't even want to say dominoes, because it would just be like, it happened to such a degree that's really trying to understand. I think like in my mind right now is a technology map of even just like all the SaaS products that we have in our company. Like this unit talks to that unit talks to this, right? You said all these connections that are taking place. And do we really understand the vulnerability that maybe an outsized role, one piece of that would have, right? I appreciate what they're doing and trying to be in security, and cybersecurity is massive, and it's not an easy undertaking. It does give you pause to say, okay, if everything's working, awesome, it's working. But for it not to really understand your systems, to be able to have a recovery, to be able to recover more quickly, it also is I mean, this is, I don't want to make light of everything that happened, but it's like literally, okay, well, now you got to turn it on and turn it off again. Right? Turn off, right? Like you got to go reboot all your systems,
Yep.
right? When was the last time some of them were rebooted? Like it sounds like people didn't even know how to reboot some of their systems potentially, right? Or the
Yeah,
people
no,
on,
I think that was part of the airline problem was
yeah,
they just are always on and
always on it,
never off.
right?
And
That uptime is there. So we've gotten to the point that if there's a software upgrade, it kind of just happens, right? Or there's seemingly it's seamless until it's not.
so this felt to me almost like a human frailty or a bureaucratic frailty, if you will, like that this occurred, that an upgrade like this or whatever it was would have gone out without any kind of proper testing.
Yeah, it feels like QA.
Yeah, right. Like a large organization had a failure there, a human failure, I would argue. So,
Yep. Sure.
which leads me to my next segment, which is the rise of AI and and the threat. I see. If I were selling AI, and again, here's where I think we are with AI. We haven't the killer apps haven't arrived yet. We're kind of the web browser stage back in the 90s where Netscape Navigator just landed and everybody realized, oh, okay, the internet's going to be cool. But we haven't gotten to e-commerce. We haven't gotten to social media. We haven't gotten to mobile devices or any of that stuff. That's where we are right now with AI. And I think generative AI and ChatGPT was this eye-popping demonstration of what can be potentially harnessed. But it doesn't take you long. It's just like when I was selling e-marketing services at the turn of the century, and everybody said, you will never use email as a marketing tool. We'll never do it. It's spam. We'll never do it. We'll never do direct
Right.
marketing through email.
That's right. Right. Exactly. I'm
never buying anything over the internet with my credit card. I'm never going to do it. I remember all those days and all those objections. And I remember, and I've heard everybody tell me that AI is not going to come for your job and it's never going to, but it will. And it is. And it can't be bargained with. It's inevitable that the killer apps, at some point in the next 18 months, the salespeople will be arriving at the decision makers' offices, or not even. They'll be presenting over an event like this. It won't be a face-to-face or a personal visit, but the pitch will be compelling, and it will basically say, "Here's a subscription that you can buy that will basically eliminate the 12th floor,
right,
for the most part, completely." Keep a few supervisors or whatever, but it's coming. And I'm curious what you think about all that. I mean, do you see it as everybody I have this conversation with in the middle of these interviews, I always have this conversation. I say, I believe this is an existential threat to IT professionals.
right.
And I hear a lot of different responses to that. I'm curious what yours is.
Well, something about me, my profile, I'm a relationship person. So I would be inclined to say, I would hope not, right? Like that how do we truly leverage it in such a way that it's doing things that we just as an individual can't do, right? I don't have that computing power in my head. So some of the going back to the machine learning, like go through that step. It's just not, you don't end up at AI, right? You start with the machine learning. We have years of showing that what's the problem we're trying to solve. So if that salesperson comes up and what's my problem of, having a higher EBITDA? Is that my problem? Like how do I scale an organization when it's really hard to find deep talent? Okay. Maybe, right? Maybe looking at it in that side, but knowing that I'm a CEO and that I'm a capitalist and I am looking for shareholder value and all of that, sure. But there's also a balance of what has been some of our own differentiation is the fact that we get on the phone with people. We do, right? We talk to people, and there's something that's not just, when I think about the social sciences aspect of it, right? That won't be satisfying, I think, or that there could be a whiplash. Same side, we have to be dealing in reality. I say that quite often. Like I get to deal in reality, and so it's not even just it's coming, it's here. There are areas that we can be doing things that will improve the experience for our customers by leveraging the artificial intelligence. But I have to say I'm really cautious on the generative AI, because we don't have the controls yet. And of course, we're going to hear about all the nefarious stuff as opposed to all the positive, which is just human. That's human nature. We've always had that. So how do we have a level of being, I'm also tend to be pragmatic. Like, how do we be pragmatic and think about these areas that are for the overall benefit of whatever that segment is that you're trying to benefit, right? Like for me, my customers, how do I do a benefit for them and the shareholders? When you mentioned, like, people are like, oh, they're coming for your jobs and the 12th floor is gone. Last year we were meeting with some customers who said that they had already had an experience where one of their teams, I think it was a team of 5, coded themselves out of a job. They already, right? Like that already happened in the IT sector, right? They did.
I think this is the again, capitalism is undefeated. And just as we outsourced every, massive amounts of programming work to cheaper destinations, that cycle will happen again once agentic AI can prove out. And I think it is daily being tested and proven out that it just is going to be better at programming and flawless at programming. Because in the end, there's really only one right outcome to a program. I mean, it either gets you the answer or it doesn't.
That's right.
And if you put enough, and this is where I think it gets nefarious. It's like programming seems binary and kind of ironically, even though we consider it an amazingly great job, and we had this whole learn to code mantra that was going around for a while. That's not good advice anymore. I think the coders are going to be the ones who are in the crosshairs first. But what starts to blow my mind is the idea that creative can begin to be the human capacity for creativity can be effectively tested away. That it won't be an art anymore; it'll be a science. That where we used to split test things and use a control and continue to test and test, that a system in a generative AI system can effectively establish a control that can never be beat for a particular offer, that the offer is just never going to be beat. And it can cycle through that so fast that that a human is no longer competitive. Even their creativity is no longer competitive, because the generative AI system can just come up with so many different ideas so fast that there's no human that can map to it, and it will get to a control that can never be beat in a particular offer to a particular audience. And that's just raw horsepower that will win. And that's what bothers me, is when the essence of humanity begins to be challenged by pure compute.
That's what we have to fight against. And the word you just used, what I think about is we would be at risk of losing our humanity, which there's lots of things that could challenge that. So talking about should the compute power, where you were saying that, what I was thinking about is, again, what I mentioned earlier, like the satisfaction of the creative process. Like at what point then would people, I mean, this is okay, then do we go back and just then start homesteading and being on our own land. And they're like, okay, they're doing all that. So
well,
so
so
why bother? I'm gonna grow my own food, or
well,
I'm gonna go create my own thing, because I've lost that ability of having that creative process is now taken away from me. Right? How as a human in my humanity, how do I feed that for myself?
this is where I get concerned. I mean, I get concerned in a variety of ways. The other is this idea of having we had an existential crisis at Solutions Review. We were in the words on screens business. We write posts at Solutions Review, but when ChatGPT arrived, we very quickly realized that we were not defensible against what is coming.
Sure.
And SEO won't survive. I don't know. I'm not even sure the browser's going to survive. I think Google is probably having some existential conversations right now themselves.
For a couple of reasons, but sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But we realized that we needed to have these type. We needed to move to this sort of a model where we're having human to human conversations, extemporaneous conversations, interesting interactions, human interactions. But again, what is so nefarious is what you see happening is with chatbots and ultimately, digital avatars and whatever these things are that I keep seeing in my Twitter feed, where it looks like an actual human being, and all you have to start to get is the lip syncing right. We won't be able to tell anymore. And our primitive brain, whatever it is, the limbic system, whatever our primitive brain, where we've been for hundreds of thousands of years sitting across fires and caves from one another. That's why we like the human to human conversation.
For sure.
But only in the last 20 years now, that conversation is we're no longer sitting across a fire. So I can't see you in 3D. My brain says you're a human, but you might not be anymore. And I won't be able to tell the difference, and I'll still get what I want out of it. I'll get customer service, I'll get sales, I'll get support, I'll get all those things. And I might even get it better because it'll be perfect, because it'll be able to detect my issues and leverage a massive amount of resources to synthesize a response that is perfect for me.
Well, I'm going to say that perfection's not here yet, and we just had that conversation about CrowdStrike.
So, like I said, it's not here yet. But the idea that it's not, that people,
right?
So the titans of the next revolution are in high school.
Sure.
It was Jobs and Gates. It was in the PC. It was Elon and Bezos and Zuckerberg. The next ones, we don't even know who they are yet. They're still in high school and they're just getting together. They're just realizing what's available to them, and they're getting their hands on this stuff. And what they're going to come up with that are going to make them the trillionaires of the next generation.
Yeah. Well, I do my experience and continuing to evolve, running a fully remote company, and have before the pandemic. This is how we were set up to begin with. What I know to be true is we're really efficient on Zoom, and there's Zoom fatigue, and I cannot understate the value of when we have in-person team meetings and having that. So while an avatar or something might give me my perfect answer when I want to get stuff done, I don't see how it replaces that shared experience that's still on for our humanity is there. So, but interesting, in the generation that you just mentioned, that maybe high school, maybe younger, who knows, I worry about them and how they learned how to interact socially, because they definitely had a setback with the pandemic and whatnot, and technology. So yeah, how to make sure that we have the future we want. How do we make sure we have the future that we want, right? Like, I think that's on us.
Again, is that just, it's like anything else, right? Again, I go back to my early internet days where people told me I'm never going to buy anything online and I'm never going to respond to any email marketing. And it's like, yeah, you will. Yeah, you will. Because it will be better for you. It'll be more convenient. It'll be easier. It'll be better. And so, yeah, so small town Main Street America is going to suffer. The small mom and pop shops are going to go away because they can't compete. And in the end, I just have seen this happen enough to know that is, it's just like we don't buy our music in a store anymore. I used to buy my music 10 songs at a time on a big round platter.
There's still people who sell them, but I get it. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, no, you can, right.
Yeah, well, I think about banking, like the changes in banking that have taken place. Like you're saying, would you ever buy, online? Would you ever think you were going to do your banking off your phone?
Right, exactly.
Right, but what's the positive on that? Globally now, there's more people who have access to banking than did previously. Right. So we've raised some standards of living with that technology. How do we make sure that we focus on that in the times that we know are anticipating are coming with the innovation we have right now?
Well, and I think, and I'm not a doom and gloomer by any means. I'm just fascinated by the whole thing. I think it's going to be absolutely mind-boggling.
Yep.
How it happens. I think there will be collateral damage, and I don't think there's any way to avoid that for people in, I mean, I have 2 kids who just are, entered the workforce. I have another daughter who's entering college. I fear for what's going to happen to them in their careers from this, because in the end, work has a certain satisfying power that we all want. Or all require. And so I worry about the next generation for sure. But I'm curious about what you were saying earlier with regard to remote work. So one of the feelings I have as well is that it might not be in everybody's best interest right now to not be in the office. Because while it feels good, and it's, work-life balance, and we're going through this moment post-pandemic where we're all kind of happily stretching our legs into this new hybrid remote. You're missing out on all kinds of other benefits with regard to hearing what the plans are for the 12th floor, and what's happening at the office, and where changes are happening that might impact you in particular. But more to the point, you're also missing out on, I think, some of the shared knowledge, the spontaneous interactions, the mentorship, all of that. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, you've been on both sides of the coin now. What are your thoughts on how you approach it as CEO?
So there's definite challenges. There's benefits, right? One of the ones that we have is that we don't let borders determine our talent, right? So I'm not stuck to my geography and saying I can only do this talent pool. So that I appreciate, and I think that brings a huge richness, I could say, for Percona, right? We have a huge richness of cultural diversity, which helps making sure that you're innovative, right? You need to not look the same. That said, I also struggle with making sure that our teammates don't get isolated, because there is a bunch of fatigue that can come if your interaction is always either a Zoom call or even just instant messaging. So it's those words, not even, I've been doing this so long that I even just said to a colleague this morning, they sent something over Slack and of writing, and I said, I could hear you say that word. Like I literally heard his voice on a specific word. I'm like, oh, I have more voices in my head now. But I do worry for early career folks. And this is just my own personal experience. There's, like you said, that mentoring, just seeing how people interact with one another, seeing how people that are effective, how much do you learn and say, ooh, I'm not going to do that? There's the positive, but there's also the, oh, that didn't work out so well. Or just those quick interchanges of saying, hey, can you look over my shoulder? Can you show me something like that? So I'm a huge proponent of remote work. Like I said, we've been successful with that, and it takes a lot of work. And we make sure that we budget for in-person team meetings that there is a craving for. And then sometimes, because of my role, I travel more than the average Perconian would travel. But I get it. Like, I get what happens when, when I first started working remote. I'll say my friend who introduced me, she did say, yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm not sure, Ann, you're a little bit too type A. I don't know that you'll be able to handle working remote. I was like, what does that mean? Right. But okay. Right. Like, I figured it out, but there is some kind of blend. I think there's a blend. How some companies, and again, I haven't sat in their boardrooms or their executive meetings where they're like, you're now all in person, right? Like, bam, like, oh, okay, maybe there was a little bit of a PR. Hearts and Minds could have been one a little bit better, but there is the need for the human contact even in an all remote setting.
Well, so talk a little bit about your path. So you're now CEO of a company. You made decisions along the way. I'm curious how you got into technology in the first place.
Well, I say I fell into it. In a former life, I was in banking, traded currency. I did retail banking, commercial lending, traded currency. And then I took an 8-year break from my career when I started my family. So when the youngest was going to kindergarten, I'm like, the gig is up. The gig is up. My husband started his own business and I'm like, someone needs healthcare. We live in the United States. I'm like, someone needs healthcare. And my neighbor worked for MySQL AB. And at the time, I'm like, I need a job. And I thought of it as a job, not a career move. And I had the good fortune that I got in with the MySQL professional services team. But when I started my interview, they were MySQL. And during that time, the Sun announcement happened. So I never worked for MySQL. I worked for the team in Sun, and then Oracle when Oracle bought Sun. And then I moved over to Percona 11 years ago, just from contacts that I had. And so I am not a technologist. So I joke, I play one on TV. Here we are. I'm playing one on TV again. I just have had the opportunity of working with amazing folks. That's why I love open source, and just learning along the way, and just having every step of the way. I've just had various opportunities to continue to learn and grow and have a seat at the table.
So what would you say was perhaps, you decided to get into, in kind of a serendipitous way, get into technology, but as you were moving your way through, what roles did you find were more beneficial than others? I know we've had conversations where folks had been on the support side and that kind of helped them understand customers more, or there've certainly been people that we've talked to have been programmers and kind of worked their way through product teams and ultimately client engagements. What did you find kind of most beneficial as you were moving through your early career in technology?
Because I was in the professional services group, I got exposed to experts, global experts in a technology that just was expansive, right? Just like, whoa, like this is not something I've ever had exposure to or thought about. So because they were also customer facing, I got that blend of understanding the criticality of the work that we do on the technology side and how it actually impacts sometimes to the individual. I mean, the unfortunate, maybe fortunate, unfortunate, couple months back, I spoke to a client of ours who has his career has taken him to different companies. He's always been pulling Percona along. Why is that? We literally saved his job one night because he dropped a table, but put in the wrong thing and was in a panic and called, and our team was able to talk him through, help him through that. So exposure to that tech side. And I would say I've been in open source this whole time, and I didn't know anything about open source, frankly, right? Like, knew nothing about it, but just that the camaraderie and the collaborative nature in the fact that there's healthy conflict, like everybody has an opinion. Holy cow. Everybody has an opinion and they feel comfortable voicing their opinion. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, but it's also pretty fascinating. So that's helped me just because of how I learn and I love hearing other perspectives and growing that way. I've been given that experience. And by starting on the services side of the house, if you will, collecting people that I can use then as references to help me understand, or, okay, I don't understand this. I'll go talk to somebody and say, let me repeat it back to you. Am I saying this right? Whatnot. So that's been super helpful for me because it's a cross between the internals and the externals, customer and tech. It's been a great opportunity for me.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask your thoughts on being a woman in technology. You're a leader in a technology sector, and we hear it at Solutions Review quite a bit, particularly when we're organizing events and pulling together panels that we need to have more women represented, and we go out of our way to do just that. But sometimes it's very hard for us to find women, and we also know from just our audience and understanding that there is an imbalance, and you can't deny that there is an imbalance in technology with regard to gender. What was your experience, and kind of, do you have any advice to young women who are getting into the technology sector, and was there any learning or maybe anything that you weren't too fond of as you went through?
Well, I would say that we're all a product of our experiences, right? And whatnot. So I think starting back to me being a child, I have some things that have helped me be in male-dominated situations. Because when I do reflection, interestingly, I always have been somehow. But I think part of it is I played team sports as a child, and I don't want to make a gross generalization that males do team sports, because that's not the case. But I was socialized similarly, so I can understand the individual contribution and being a team player is hugely important. I also happened to go to an all-girls high school, so being encouraged, and I was in the sciences. I did well in math and whatnot, and having teachers call out, and I didn't have, socially, you didn't really have to care about the boys or anything like that. Like, it's just all girls, AP classes, take whatever. I had a calculus teacher who, senior year in high school, is like, you're going to go to college, you're going to be with boys, and that was her word, not mine. You're going to be with boys. They're going to be intimidated by you. And I was thinking, like, that, what is she talking about? Sure enough, I experienced that. And I was like, oh, she's right. But I was like, I'm no different than he is. Like, I can do math. Like, what's the big deal? So for me, it was a little bit, I had that good fortune of being normalized. But having that level, I think, even though there's times where you have self-doubt, or I've had self-doubt, just being confident, like, I'm me. I have something to contribute. I've been supported and encouraged throughout. And I think it's just a matter of really trying to find your voice. Like I said, in college, I helped start a credit union. I was like the only female in some of the sessions. When I was on the trading floor for banking, again, the representation was lower. I'm proud to say here at Percona, our executive team, I'm a female, our CTO and our CFO are all women. And I credit that to the culture that the founders started, right? The right person for the job, and making sure that we really think that way and look that way. And it's not always easy, right? I represent females, sure, but I'm also white American. So I understand that there's some lack of diversity on that as well, and how to be mindful. But just, having the understanding that you belong. And if there's, he says there are some things that you don't like. I've called out behavior before but never in a way of like, it was threatening, to just like, hey, awareness, that's not appropriate, or I'm not one of the guys, right? Whatever that might be. So I'd like to see that we continue to have diversity. Again, just for diversity of thought, the data shows, right? There's been enough studies that show that it improves performance. So I feel fortunate for the opportunities I've had.
So it hasn't felt to me that there's a kind of a negative pressure on women in technology. It just feels that there's just it's almost like it's been a natural selection of interest where more men have ventured into technology than women have chosen to. I don't believe it doesn't feel like there's a discrimination necessarily. As a matter of fact, it feels almost like there's a lot of encouragement to when there are women kind of emerging, that's a good thing, and everybody wants to see more of it. But I don't know. Have you seen anything that would represent that? Or
Well, I would say that there are still a lot of biases, and some of them are unconscious biases in studies that have been done. For example,
biases in what way?
So you're saying like that maybe the interest of there's not an interest for girls to go into computers or something like that. There is a bias that's been shown even in schools that if it's a math class and two kids raise their hand, one's a boy, one's a girl, the teachers tend to call on the boy, not the girl.
Oh, interesting.
So I think that while those sorts of barriers need to be broken down, that there's stereotypes that continue to be perpetuated that we just need to really be mindful of all across diversity. Whether it's how folks that are neurodivergent versus neurotypical, and what is the workplace or the schooling, how do we account for those differences? There is still things there. And while some of them I haven't experienced, I have been there where I live. There's a Gorge Technology Group. They have a Women in STEM. They showed a movie, and I was listening to this panel talking, and there's some people like in their 30s where women, they're like, yeah, no, that discrimination from the 50s, I just experienced it last week. And I was like, really? Like that's, so there's still societal pressures that we need to just be mindful of, because I don't know that my individual experiences are common for others.
No, and obviously everybody has their own experience. So I think it's going to be fascinating, and to kind of bring it full circle, I think in the AI revolution, I don't think the impact is going to be gender based. I think it's going to be human based versus. I don't think it's going to. It's kind of like the Terminator, right? The Terminator speech. It doesn't feel pity. It doesn't care about your feelings or whatever it is. It's like it's just going to. Going to impact across the board, and it might well be that. I think the great irony is that the most impacted initially will be in IT, so it might be maybe a little disproportionate in its impact across genders, but we'll have to see.
Well, to see, yeah.
Well, this has been great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for the time today.
Likewise.
And best of luck with all of the work that you're doing at Percona.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sounds like you're on. I think we're all on the precipice of an amazing time, and we'll continue to track things at Percona, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Doug. Have a great day.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today.